Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Black Tech Jobs for Coffee, Tech, and Opportunity. We could not be more and more excited about the opportunity that's ahead of us. We have two fantastic panelists joining us, Laur, and I want to make sure that I'm not doubling up here. Okay, there we are. And we're talking today about human resources. And we're on the human resources side of what we're doing. I think I'm logged into YouTube. Let me make sure I'm out everywhere to make. There we go. We were getting a little background noise, so I apologize for the delayed start in our kickoff here. So thank you so much for tolerating our little technical challenge. But we are excited to have Denise Bindelglass and Laur Birk joining us, two seasoned HR professionals, as we talk about coffee, tech, and opportunity. We're living in very interesting times, one, during a global pandemic, and two, doing what arguably is the largest civil rights movement of the 21st century. And both of these things are impacting the way that we work. And very often, as both employees and leaders of employees, we lean on our HR professionals to help guide us and direct us. And today I want to introduce the two folks who are going to help us in this conversation. And I want to open it up, of course, because all of our sessions are very interactive, and we're going to bring on questions from the audience later in the show. But first, I'm going to start with our first guest, and her name is Laur Birk. Laura is the Vice President of Human Resources at Barilla, the pasta company. And as Laura likes to describe it, the great stuff in the blue box. Or maybe that's my description. Here's Laura. Hi, Laura. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfect. Hi, Will. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Laura comes to us with tons and tons of experience as a human resources professional in a very large global organization. And at Black Tech Jobs, we view every company as a tech company. Either they manufacture or develop hardware, software, or they leverage it to execute their mission and or help their employees execute their mission. I now want to bring on our second guest, Denise Bindelglass, who I have struggled to get her name right on several occasions, even though I've known her for a long time. So I repeatedly apologize, and sadly, it may continue. But Denise is an exceptional professional, passionate professional about the world of HR, and especially in technology, where she's had significant insight and leadership. And today, she's the Vice President of Human Resources at ActiveCampaign, one of the fastest growing global CRM companies on the planet. So I'll bring Denise on. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Will. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Denise.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to get right to it and get started, since I had a little bit of a blunder because I made the mistake of having a YouTube window open during the beginning of our conversation that put me in stereo in my own ear. Well, today we're living in the midst of this global pandemic. And I'll start in reverse, since Denise, I brought you on last, and I'd like for you to talk about, because you're a global company, how you work for a global company. Talk about how that's affected the way you lead your team, both in the way that they do their jobs, and then their whole person, that person that comes to work who could be concerned about their future, the future of their family, physical safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing in your organization to help your team members and the broader organization to navigate through this global pandemic?
Sure. There is so much to this, so many layers, and you touched on about 20 different topics, Will, in your opening question. So I'll try and be brief. I've often said, to many people, I've been doing running people teams and HR teams for so long that there's almost nothing I haven't seen. Nothing really that would fluster me, nothing I haven't encountered over the years across many different industries. But this is definitely a first for me, and I think for all of us, right? A global pandemic has just caused a complete shift in how we look at our org, how we've had to onboard our employees. As Will said, we're growing extremely rapidly, roughly 60% year-over-year growth. When I joined the company about 2.5 years ago, we were around 130 employees, and now we're over 600. So if you think of just onboarding our new employees, we went from bringing every single new employee to Chicago for 2 weeks, whether they were coming from Brazil, Ireland, Sydney, Indianapolis, somewhere else, for a 2-week period in Chicago. And everyone loved it, and it was a chance for us to really get to know our new employees. And now, over the last few months, it's been a complete reversal of that. So sending them their laptops to their home offices, virtual onboarding, never really having a manager meet face-to-face with his employees. So that's been super difficult, and my team has handled it really well. But that's just one example of a dramatic shift. I would also say that we've tried to really double down on the mental health and physical health of our employees during this time of, especially the first few months, where in some of our locations, our employees were not even really able to leave their homes. In Dublin, for example, there were very strict guidelines around even taking a walk more than a kilometer or two. So we have launched a series called Your Health Matters, which is really all about physical and mental well-being. We launched what we call our MRG, Manager Resource Groups, where we bring our leaders, our people leaders together once every other week to just talk about different topics, some related to what we're dealing with and some not at all related, just to make sure that we're connecting people, especially our employees and teams that don't have a chance to connect naturally in the course of their daily work. I could go on, but those are just some brief examples of what we've tried to do differently in a crazy, difficult time.
Sure. And Laura, how about you? Because you're supporting not just people in offices, but people who are working in manufacturing facilities, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world.
Yes, thank you. And Denise, good to hear that your challenges are very similar to the challenges that we're all facing and just having to adjust in so many areas. We have 2 manufacturing plants in the U.S., primarily, Will, so my responsibility is for North and South America. We don't have plants in Canada or Brazil, but we do have employees there. And I think juggling that, what we needed to do for our essential workers in the plants versus what we're doing for those that had the flexibility where they could work from home, was almost 2 parallel paths that we had to do at the same time. And we had a little bit of insight from our Italian colleagues who were experiencing the pandemic in Italy before it hit the States, and we could learn from them and what they were doing in their plants and for the employees. So we had a little bit of a peek around the corner and could really leverage that. And we really tried to do that. And now they're recovering a little bit more, and we're seeing kind of this second wave that really never went down, and it really just stayed. And just to echo what Denise said, we've done a lot of support for managers and mental health. And I think the biggest challenge right now is folks are realizing that the impact that schools are having on the employees and how they're going to navigate that. And it's not even like it's consistent across the state. It's different from district to district, or even within a neighborhood, it might be very different. So there's not a one size fits all, which is oftentimes what we try to do to scale things. And this has very much been a employee by employee kind of reaction. So you can have some infrastructure in place, but you almost have to reverse engineer it and say, okay, when can you work? What is your situation at home? What's going on with kiddos? And back into it. So it's been a very much leader by leader kind of conversation to try to help the employees. So
that's important. And even now here in Chicago, there's lots of parents debating and trying to figure out what they're going to do, homeschool, a hybrid, what their schools are doing, what they should do in response to what their schools are doing. And all of those things are impacting the way we work. I'm going to pivot a bit to another topic. In the midst of this of COVID, we're also kind of in the middle of the largest social justice movement of the 21st century. Can you talk about what your firms are doing in response to Black Lives Matters and the discussions in and around social justice? And Laura, we'll start with you, and then we'll come back to Denise.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, it was the perfect storm of crisis, pandemic, economic crisis, and what's happening maybe with family. And then you add a racial crisis on top of it and the injustices that were happening there. And it was just like this perfect storm where people were consuming tons of media. And I think, at least for myself, you knew the injustices that were happening, but when it happens on top of all of these other things, it's very sobering. And I think we took the posture of not being first to post something on social media, not being first to say, we're going to do give away all this money and have a very outwardly kind of brand posture. We took the reverse. We actually said, we're not going to do that. And there was a lot of conversation internally with our Black employees around why we made that decision. But we've decided we're going to do the work inside first and then go outside and talk about what we're doing, because we wanted to make sure that it didn't just look opportunistic or unauthentic. And so we've really built a team around what is the workplace impact that we want to have around racial injustice. So we've pulled together an actual work stream of team, and we're thinking about the community, what we want to do from a personal leadership development, education perspective, how we want to help make sure that our policies are really inclusive and that we're doing everything we can to attract and retain all people of color, and then finally measure it. And so we're doing the work from the inside out.
Got it. And Laura, I'm sorry, Denise?
Yeah, so it's certainly, as Laura said, has been kind of crisis over crisis, right? So just a quick history of DEI at Active Campaign. Before I started roughly 3 years ago, there was a DEI group that kind of just organically started growing and meeting once every other week or so. We have a very millennial population. Average age is around 30 years old. Just our employees are very passionate, whether they're allies or people of color or diverse in their own way. And so it's been one of our 5 core values as well for as long as we've had values. So it is a big part of our culture. What Black Lives, and so we hired our first DEI leader, Trevor Jenkins, around a year ago, a little more than a year ago, realizing that this needed a much more proactive focus than even what the people team could do, and definitely deserve that. So anyway, fast forward to Black Lives Matter, it has greatly heightened just the attention that DEI across the org has received, which has been awesome. So a very negative, difficult time has caused even all of our employees, not just those that were already passionate, to really pay more attention and hold us as an organization more accountable when it comes to DEI goals and our plans. So I guess the good news out of this for us has been that DEI as a voice and as a platform has amplified across the organization. And so our ERGs, our employee resources groups, have more visibility and attention now than they did, say, 6 months ago. The organization and our employees are really asking for more metrics and goals around what are we actually committing to as an organization? Why is our leadership team not as diverse as it should be? So the last few months have been, they haven't been easy conversations. I think our heart is in the right place, but we definitely have, a long way to go, as do most organizations, in terms of just continuing to make sure that this is a sustained effort and it wasn't just something that happened a few months ago and is going to dissipate over time. So we're trying really hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
That's great. Thank you both for your candid and open discussions, because very few organizations can really look back and say that we've got it all figured out. I think lots of people are still figuring it out. And in the presence of progress, there's still room for improvement. As you two have both been operated as senior executives in HR for some time, we've got a few HR leaders who are also on the call. What advice would you give other HR leaders who are trying to figure this all out? Maybe you could talk about maybe a process or a methodology you took at evaluating where you were before you started your next series of advanced steps?
Mhm. I'll dive in first. I think a couple things that we did well, and a couple things that we didn't do so well. I think, to Denise's point, I think our heart was in the right way when we went to our employee resource group and said, hey, how can we support you during this time? How can we make a difference? How can we show our leadership? How can we really do meaningful work? And I think, especially when it was so raw and things that they've experienced their whole life have been heightened, it was the wrong ask. It wasn't fair for us to ask them, hey, how can we help? Or, what is our role in this? And I think, so it was finding the right cadence between where we needed to lead, and then also when they were ready to re-engage with them as true partners. And there's no right or wrong cadence to that, but asking the ERG to lead, because we have an African-American and a Latinx employee resource group that's combined, asking them to play that leadership role, which they have done for us for several years historically. It was just the wrong ask. And so what we did was actually had a day of understanding where all employees could come together. We could learn together, just kind of, again, working from the inside out, asking these questions and saying, and a lot of employees were saying, look, we want to do something. We don't want to say the wrong thing, but we don't know how to help, or we don't want to be insensitive to this. And so, what can we do? And that's really where we started. And then, there was the right time where a lot of those folks are ready to come back in and re-engage and really lead and help guide us and give us coaching and give me coaching. And if we were saying things wrong or not doing things quite right, and having those trusted partnerships were really, really important and critical to do it both from the business and the leadership perspective, but also from the employee's perspective, and doing it so that it was sustainable and it wasn't just lip service. And so that's kind of the journey that we're in right now.
Okay. And Denise?
Yeah, that sounds really familiar. I think the biggest concern I had, if I look back to, 2 or 3 months ago, just after George Floyd's death, was trying to make sure that whatever we didn't come off as gratuitous, right? Like, it really, again, the heart's there, but like, there was a desire on the part of many of our senior leaders and just broad leadership to want to reach out to every one of our Black employees and just make sure that they were okay. And we talked about that, and I think that did happen to some extent. But as Trevor, my trusted DEI partner, said, Denise, and Trevor is a Black man, and he said, like, the burden's already, we're feeling the burden. Like, people come to us to feel like we're gonna solve the problem, like we're the caretakers, and just be conscious of that dynamic. And I think that was really important to remember. I would say if you're an organization that hasn't yet really committed to deep DEI, I mean, clearly, that needs to happen, and some just basic training around what is the D, what is the E, what is the I. There are some great groups to work with. We do a mandatory DEI training for every new employee that's onboarded. And, diversity looks a bit different in each of our global locations. So we try and factor that in as well. But that has just become, ongoing part of our onboarding. We're doing anti-racism training for all of our leaders in September. So I would just say, if you haven't started doing those things, if you don't have ERGs established, we have 6 or 7 of them, ranging from actively Black to Latinx to Pride to AC moms and AC dads. Think of diversity in many, many ways. I think that people of color and Black Americans have gotten a lot of attention right now, but there are clearly so many types of diverse employees in most of our organizations.
Mm-hmm. And just to add, Will, if you are more advanced, one of the things that we're doing for our mid-year performance evaluations is adding a component, a new performance expectation, to not only do the compliance kind of training side, but to say, what am I doing as a leader to build my own personal development? This is on me to learn. what am I doing within my team to bring more awareness or education around that? And more broadly, if I have opportunities to increase representation, how am I doing that both through hiring or promoting or developing your folks? And so I think for them to see that, okay, we're actually asking them to put it in their performance evaluation, this is serious and there is accountability around it. And so I think that's what we're doing this year for our mid-year reviews, is so we're taking the expectation up that everyone, can play an important role in this work.
I think that's awesome, because one thing that we saw from a talent acquisition point of view, everyone, we have at least, I think, 80 open jobs at any one time across the org. We're just growing so fast. And suddenly all of our hiring managers were coming to my recruiting team saying, well, where are all my diverse employees? Like, what? And it was a little frustrating, because we've been wanting to have that dialogue for a very long time. And I think we've gotten to an understanding is that, like all recruiting, it's a partnership between the recruiting team and hiring managers. And you do need to have your own network, and you do need to be responsible. And that's just a great skill to have generally. And I think our hiring managers understand that, but they don't quite know how to expand their diverse networks if they are not diverse themselves. So that is something that we're actually working on. Will and I talked about it last week. Like, how do we help them in that endeavor? And so that's something that's front and center in front of us right now, because diverse hiring is hard. It is just hard. If you've been in the trenches doing it as a recruiter or even as a hiring manager. But I applaud you for putting that directly into performance reviews. That really means that it will be discussed and measured.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. There's a couple questions, and I'm going to come to the audience questions in a second. I just have one last question. Lots of people who are likely on this call will watch the replay, maybe actively in the job market. COVID has had negative impacts on some companies more, in more industries, more so than others. What advice would you give to Black job seekers who are now actively looking for a job? What things tactically could they do to get engaged with your teams? Or what strategy have you seen work for people to go from candidate to employee?
I can go first. I would say, on the one hand, you shouldn't do anything differently than you've always done in terms of just representing yourself as a great candidate. I would say, however, I think, yes, COVID has been devastating for many companies, but there are so many companies. I mean, again, I'll plug Active Campaign again. Like, we have so many openings, and we found it's just as hard right now, diverse or not, and we've opened up our candidate pool to a national, from just focusing on Chicago to being willing to hire people nationally. So you would think that would really open up the candidate pool. But so I think it's still competitive out there. I would say that DEI and hiring diverse talent is obviously on a lot of companies' minds. But make sure that when you're talking to companies, you research enough to ensure that it is authentic, that
Right.
They want diverse hiring for the right reasons and are not just reacting to the short-term societal shift. And that, you want to work for an organization where you can bring your whole self to work every day.
That's great feedback. Now, Denise, I want to clarify something you said. You said that you're expanding nationally. Does that translate? Because someone sent me a note to make sure before this that I would bring this question up. And so I'm kind of hijacking Laura's chance to respond. So, Laura, you'll be responsible for two questions back to back.
No problem.
Are you saying with this national approach that you're considering work from home for a period that extends beyond what happens with COVID? And some have canned the phrase work from home forever. Is that what you were describing, or did I misunderstand?
No, I mean, we started posting all of our jobs as in the US as US. So whereas 6 months ago, everything would have been posted as Chicago for the most part, with some few exceptions, we are now saying we are willing to consider candidates for every role wherever they may be living. And so obviously that means permanent work from home if you are in Philadelphia or San Francisco or Miami. So that's a huge shift for us, right? So we're not quite willing to say we are an office-less, hub-less, totally 100% remote workforce. We're not quite there yet. We have offices, and we do believe that there's value in coming together and probably more of a hub approach going forward. But we also at the same time are saying we will never ask you, due to COVID, to ever come back to the office if you're not comfortable doing so for your own health and well-being.
And one of the things that we've learned, Denise, too, for companies who've expanded their pool to a national search, it's also allowed them to expand the size of the audience of potential Black employees that they could attract. Because historically, there's about 28 cities where we densely live across the country. It doesn't mean that we aren't living everywhere. I've met some folks recently who live in Montana, but that's a micro small population. And so this opens up that population as a strategy for companies who are trying to execute and improve their diverse hiring. Expanding their reach is a great tactic if it works for your organization. So Laura, I'll circle back since I hijacked the discussion a bit because I am not a panelist in this discussion. I'm only here to ask questions and facilitate. So what advice would you give to Black job seekers who are looking for a job, and any thoughts that you may have about continued work from home beyond COVID?
So on the skill side, I would say I have some essential workers in the manufacturing environment. So those folks, we've had to shift ourselves a little bit like Denise, where we've said, okay, normally it's a 12-hour shift, 4 days 1 week, 3 days the next week. We've had to reverse it and say, okay, when can you work? If you have little people at home, if you have somebody else in your family that's an essential worker and you're trying to juggle stuff and things are chaotic, when can you work? You can work 4 hours a day? Great, we'll take you 4 hours a day. So we've really had to be flexible on that. And it's changed a lot of the thinking in our manufacturing environment. So that's one. On the office side, we've also had to adjust, and we wanted to at least have our offices be a safe haven, because while we weren't requiring people to come back, we knew for some people the office was a safe place to go. It was a place, especially if you're single or you're alone and you want to just be around a few people but still feel in a safe place. So we have left our offices open, and it's interesting. We've had some people that really are grateful for that, but we've just announced that we won't require people to come back before the end of the year as well. But we're going to keep the doors open. So if you feel safer in the office and want to come in 1 day a week, do so. If you want to come in 2 days a week, do so. And then, we have the rules around that. In terms of skill, we're in food, so we manufacture a piece of it, but we also have a very big consumer interface that we've historically done. And all of that consumer interfacing work has completely backed off. But our digital marketing, our e-commerce business, those types of areas have increased. So what I would say to the Black candidates that are listening is, what transferable skills do you have, and pivot there, because to Denise's point, there are a lot of people laying off, but there are also a lot of opportunities. And so you need to think about, how are people buying differently? How are people consuming media differently? So all of those types of skills are how we're seeing our business have to shift. And that's where we'll be looking in the future for more talent.
Awesome. I think that's great. There's a couple of things, and then we're going to shift to the audience questions. We have a few that are queued up. So for those of you who publish questions, we are absolutely going to get to them. And the one thing I would add to that is, and during this time, during COVID, social media across my friend network, and I see it across lots when I talk to other people professionally, that everyone's tried to kind of learn something or do something different, change their diet, get more active with exercise. And so it's also an interesting time, since for many of us who don't have a commute, even if you are working and you're actively employed, it's a good time to build a new skill set. And so being aware of kind of some of the trends that are happening, that's also a good thing to do. So I do want to shift now to some of the comments that came up earlier. JQ said, and this is as it relates to ERGs, some organizations actually prided themselves in leveraging their Black ERGs to support the conversation after George Floyd's death. Black staff speaking to their CEOs on how they were doing. So there were differences of opinion or ideas on approaches. And some companies did that, and it looks like there are some employees who value that. I think it's critical during these times that people also feel heard So as much of it is, I think, strategic execution for those who are listening and who are HR leaders, the human element of this continues to be important. And then there's another question that came up. Caitlin Garcia, how are you measuring the success of your DE&I trainings? Are there specific metrics being captured? I know a lot of, and that's Caitlin's question, but I know a lot of folks who have invested in the unconscious bias training as an example, as one of the core components of their training as it relates to diversity strategy. Could you talk a little bit about how you're measuring success, the success of your training?
I can go first. So one example, so it's hard, right? Some of it is subjective. We're not always sure that it's kind of sinking in, and that's why we're trying to build more metrics and goals around it so that we can actually have that measurement. One thing that but having said that, one thing that we're doing is we're looking at every piece of the candidate life cycle, again, since we're recruiting so much, and just diving in to see if there is bias that might exist in any part of that process. So everything from looking at the employee referrals that we receive, you know, and we receive many hundreds of referrals from our current employees, you know, is there any bias in that process? So digging into that kind of manually, is there any bias in terms of the interview process? So one thing that we just very recently did was ensure that there was more diversity in our interview groups, right? So that even if you're not talking to diverse candidates, like, let's make sure that there is a diverse perspective there. And that also obviously helps candidates feel that, wow, there is diversity that exists, right? Because I'm talking to not just an interview panel of white men, for example. So we're still figuring out those metrics, but those are just a couple of examples of how we're hoping to at least check ourselves in terms of you know what's happening, as well as just existing employees. So we look at comp twice a year from a DEI perspective to just see if there seems to be any bias or any concerns in that regard. We do a self-identification survey twice a year in the spring and in the fall, where our employees tell us anonymously whether they feel they can bring their whole selves to work. And so we do have some metrics, but we're trying to build out even more.
Got it. And Laura?
On the KPI side, two things I'll mention that Denise, I'll share some different ideas. One would be the level of engagement in the employee resource group. So does that go up after a result of training? So it's not so much the training itself, but do I have higher levels of engagement there? So that's one thing. The other one is people volunteering, because a lot of this work is passion projects for them. Are they volunteering to get involved in some of the company activity, looking at the bias piece, looking for external speakers? So what is their engagement level? So that's one. Most of ours, though, ladder up to higher level metrics in terms of diversity hires. You know, what is the percentage that we're hiring? Diversity retention. So are we bringing them in, but they don't feel included, so they don't stay? And we've split it out by gender, by minority, non-minority, and then recently we broke it out specifically for Black and African Americans so that we could see what does our hiring look like, very specific to that lens. What does the engagement look like? What does the retention look like? And to Denise's point, equal pay. We want to make sure that we can answer the question to our employees. There is equal pay. We are bringing them in. Either they're staying or they're not staying, getting to those root causes. And then are they developing? And that's really the biggest gap that we have right now is, are they able to develop and grow and get promoted at the same rates or not? But at least we're measuring. So we have the statistics.
Got it. We have another question from Roderick. What would you recommend for executive level candidates looking to leverage cross-functional leadership skills out of their core background? Because there are some skills that transfer at a certain level of executive leadership. I think back 10 years ago, many of the folks who became CIOs were former something completely different. And so in some cases, CMOs, heads of marketing, in some cases, chief financial officers who had taken over IT. Are there any examples that you've seen or any recommendations that you might make as someone looks to broaden their search and not just be narrow in the skill area that they're most well trained or have the majority of their experience in, to broaden the opportunities that they could apply for, get interviews with, or in today's environment, virtual coffee discussions.
Mm-hmm. Two quick things come to mind. One, I would ask what their external work looks like. So are they on boards? Are they on nonprofit boards? Are they getting exposure outside of their normal company? So if they're looking to make a pivot or an adjustment, sometimes I find you can get that almost outside of the company to build those skills. A lot of it's transferable knowledge. So you're leading large groups of people, talk about the change efforts that you've been able to employ, even if you don't have the technical vertical know-how to do that. And look at your network. And if it looks very homogenous, diversify your own network, because that will also help you build those types of skills. So if you're only hanging out with HR people, then you're probably only going to be networked with HR people. If you want to network with CIOs, that I need to go where the CIOs are and understand how my work adds value to that type of leadership role. So look at your own network and do some work external would be two quick things that come to mind.
Denise, any thoughts from your perspective?
I was kind of heading in the same direction as Laura. I think it's hard. I think companies can take very narrow approaches, right? I've seen that. I see it all the time, even within recruiting teams. Like if you don't have exactly what we're looking for, like you're kind of sometimes written off. It's just easier to hire someone who's already done what you want someone to do, right? So I think we're always trying to challenge ourselves in that regard. But I would say, like, yeah, networking, talking to executive search consultants, just getting to know them and getting their perspective as people who, recruit all day long at the executive level, trying to make some of those connections. I'm a huge believer in board involvement, not-for-profit. I'm an adjunct professor up at Northwestern. Doing those things to just give back to the community, but also to just get that exposure and have different talking points. In addition to just, I think people leadership, successfully managing, larger and larger teams is also something that's more transferable if you don't have the technical depth. Or even as an executive, like taking an executive level course at a local university. A certificate program. It doesn't mean a full, MBA or anything like that, but just to round that out. And by virtue of doing that, you're expanding your own network.
Yeah. And I'll make a couple of comments since I'm one of those people. And I also think that your transition from an executive role, so I think kind of what you do is like the head, but then there are those ancillary things that are in close proximity that I would describe as the shoulders. So when I think, if you are a sales executive, then kind of shoulder opportunities could be in marketing or some other business development strategy, depending on the types of roles that you've had in the past. So I would kind of lean starting with head, then shoulders. And then as Laura commented and Denise alluded to as well, and network in those shoulder communities first, right? So if you've done IT and you've done a certain brand of IT and you want to go to another section, go to something in close proximity of what you were doing, build your network there. And I'm going to describe, and Laura, you said the word diverse network. I'm going to describe it as diverse talent and people, especially in the Black tech community. And some people will ask me, they've been seeing our picture around the internet with Laura, Denise, and I, and we look like a 70s rock band when you look at the photograph. And my comments to people who had a little bit of judgment about the photograph, Will, what are you doing? This is Black tech jobs. Why do you have these white women? And my thought process is it's critical as a community that we diversify the people that we have conversations with. It's two-sided. One, we learn from each other in our exchanges. And two, people in leadership very often don't look like me. And so if you want to make headways, especially on the executive side, and you want to climb the career ladder, it's critical that not just the mix of talent, but the mix of types of people are diversified within your networks. And I think today there's never been a better time in my lifetime than I think right now to reach out to people, to connect, to build relationships. And if you're asking yourself the question, how do I do that? And I think someone did. How do you do that in this COVID-19 environment? One of the things that I recommend doing is you can start with a coffee conversation. And in every instance of initiating network, your goal should be to see what you can give first. And if you're saying, well, I'm watching this and I'm 5 years into my career, how do I give something to someone with 20 years of experience? It is absolutely possible. There's no way that anyone can know everything. And I'm only going to speak for me. The older you get, you begin to forget more than you know. And
Mhm.
so your capacity to learn new things because the old things have served you so well is easy. And so I will tell you, I have at least 3 mentors who are under the age of 30. They get confused sometimes about our relationship. They might introduce me as their mentor, but I'll call his name out. Again, I've done this on a couple of calls. Kevin Davenport has been an amazing mentor for me to help millennialize my thinking around the way the world works and broaden my idea suite. And so as you look at your career and you're asking yourself, you always have a position to add value. And if you lead with what you can help someone with first, you'd be amazed by what you get out of that networking opportunity. So I hope someone finds some help and my comments. Again, I am not a guest on this show. I'm just the person asking questions.
But you say, you know, we aren't maybe the normal profile of what they say. The intent is that I can then ask you to be on panel for me.
That's true.
That I can go back and look at the Facebook live chat and see, so that I can learn from what people who care about black tech jobs, what they care about, because that's what I need to learn. That's what I need to care about. And so the only way that I find that we can all help each other raise the awareness and really make a difference is to do that reciprocity. So Will, I'm putting you on record. I will be calling you saying, Will, I need you on a panel. But that is how we all help each other.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. And so at this point, I'm going to ask if there are any other questions. We are a little over time. I would like for both Laura and Denise to talk about any opportunities. I'll go to Denise first because they are hiring like crazy. And so I don't even know how to describe that with other words for a thriving business. But Denise, before we close, is there anything that you're working on that you'd like to share with the folks who are listening or will watch the video later, or things that are happening in the Active Campaign that you'd like to share?
Of course. I mean, thank you so much for giving us the forum to advertise a bit. We're growing super rapidly, as we discussed. Like, we are taking a location agnostic point of view, at least in the US. A little less so in Europe and Australia and Brazil. But basically, if you go to the Active Campaign website, career section, you'll see there's a plethora and a great diversity of jobs. So I'm looking for a couple of people on my own people team, we're always looking for great engineers. I mean, there's really never a time that we're not. There's some super interesting leadership roles, product support, customer success, so sales. I mean, it's pretty much across the board at almost every level. We don't do a ton of entry level hiring, but aside from that, you will see, all sorts of great opportunities posted. So would welcome any reach outs directly to me from anyone on this call, or just through the career section if there's interest.
Awesome. And Laura?
Yeah, for me, I don't have as many as Denise, but my plugs would be we're hiring in many, the 3 things that are true about COVID is if you work in toilet paper, Clorox and hand sanitizer and pasta, it's COVID proof. So we're hiring in our Ames, Iowa plant. So anywhere in the central kind of Ames area, upstate New York, near Rochester, or Avon, New York in particular, those are our 2 manufacturing plants. If you have family, friends, anyone who wants to relocate to that area, those we are growing. We're investing a significant capital expenditure dollars to grow those 2 plants. In the Chicagoland area, like Denise, we're pretty location free. I have an entry level IT job in particular that I'm looking for, finance, digital marketing, e-commerce, data analyst type roles. Those are the skills we need in the future. And I'd love anyone in your network who's interested.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for the opportunity too.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Denise, for joining us. Thank you to our audience for your questions and your interaction as always. Our goal here at Black Tech Jobs and Coffee Tech and Opportunity is to make connections, provide information, and allow interaction to be 2-way, because we think that's where the opportunity lies. That's where the connections lie. And we always want to encourage you to continue to expand and add to your network. So if you are on this and you and I are not connected, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to engage in conversation about helping you advance your career. And Laura and Denise are both hiring, so I'm sure they would love to receive your LinkedIn connections. Both offices in Chicago. Denise, you're right in the heart of downtown, and
Yeah.
So post-COVID, very cool office space. I've been there a few times. And Laura,
Amazing.
where's
Yeah, but
Our office is in Northbrook, so I'm in Northbrook today, actually. So.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. It is always a pleasure. And to Laura's earlier comment, if I can ever be of service to either you or Denise, I am at your disposal. Thanks, everyone. Again, that's Coffee, Tech, and Opportunity. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
thank you, Will. Bye, everybody. Coffee.